Bette Midler, a famous singer and actress, found herself in the middle of a legal battle. It wasn't just any case, it was one that would change the way people looked at celebrity rights. She had worked hard for years to build her career. Fans loved her powerful voice, which had become her trademark. But one company decided to take advantage of that voice without asking her first. This company wanted to use Bette Midler's voice in a commercial. They thought they could get away with it. Instead of reaching out to her, they found a solution. They hired a singer who could mimic her voice, making it sound like Bette was the one singing in the ad. At first it seemed like an easy win for the company. They believed there was nothing wrong with using someone's voice without permission. But Bette wasn't going to let that slide. She wasn't going to let anyone steal her voice. This is where the lawyer comes in. He represented the company and was very confident about their case. He didn't believe Bette had a chance. After all, what could be so special about a voice? He thought the case was weak. He mocked Bette's fight. He laughed at the idea that anyone could protect their voice in court. But little did he know, he was about to make a huge mistake. Bette Midler isn't just any singer, she's a legend. Known for her powerful, distinctive voice, Bette became famous in the 1970s. Her voice was like no other, and it quickly became her signature. She wasn't just a singer, she was an entertainer who could captivate an audience with every note. Her career didn't stop at music. Bette also made a name for herself in film, starring in hit movies like The Rose and Hocus Pocus. Whether she was singing on stage or acting on screen, people loved her. But it wasn't just her talent that made Bette stand out. It was her unique voice. That voice became as much a part of her identity as anything else. When people heard her sing, they instantly knew it was Bette Midler. It was more than just music, it was her brand. Her voice wasn't something she could easily replace. It was her tool for success, the thing that made her different from everyone else. It was a piece of her that fans recognized and connected with. It wasn't just about the sound, it was about who she was. So when Bette found out that a company used a voice that sounded just like hers without asking, she wasn't going to let it slide. To her, it wasn't just about the money, it was about protecting what made her who she was. Her voice was her identity, and no one could take that from her. The company behind the commercial had a simple idea: they wanted to sell their product, and they believed using Bette Midler's famous voice would help. But instead of contacting her or asking for permission, they decided to take a shortcut. They didn't need Bette Midler herself, they just needed someone who could imitate her voice perfectly. So they hired a talented singer who could recreate Bette's sound. The result was a commercial that made it sound like Bette was singing for their product. At first the company thought they had found the perfect solution. The ad aired and everyone thought it was Bette's voice. People heard the familiar tone, the unique style, and the emotion she always brought to her music. It was as if Bette herself had given her blessing to this product. But the company never asked her to be part of it. They used her voice without her permission, hoping no one would notice. They believed no one could stop them. After all, voices were hard to protect, weren't they? Bette, however, wasn't fooled. She immediately realized what had happened. She knew her voice, and she knew it wasn't her singing in that commercial. She was upset, not just because someone had stolen her voice, but because she felt her identity was being taken away from her. Her voice was part of her, and no one had the right to use it without permission. She decided to take action. Bette wasn't going to let this company get away with it. She hired a legal team and prepared to fight. The company might have thought they could get away with it, but they were about to find out how wrong they were. When the case started, the company hired a tough, ruthless lawyer. This lawyer was known for his confidence and his ability to win tough cases. He didn't think Bette Midler's case had much of a chance. To him it seemed ridiculous that someone could protect their voice. The lawyer's first reaction to the lawsuit was to laugh. He didn't believe it was worth taking seriously. He thought the idea of protecting a voice was silly. After all, voices were just sounds, right? They weren't like a brand or a logo that could be trademarked. What could be so special about a voice? He mocked Bette's legal team. He believed they didn't have a strong argument. He thought that the case would be dismissed quickly, with no problems. In his eyes, Bette was just another celebrity trying to get attention. The lawyer thought he had it all figured out. As the case moved forward, the lawyer's overconfidence grew. He kept telling his team that there was no way the court would rule in Bette's favor. He believed the company was in the right. After all, they hadn't used Bette's name or image, just her voice, which seemed like a minor detail to him. But as the trial continued, the lawyer started to feel a little uneasy. He had underestimated Bette and her team. He had assumed they wouldn't have a solid case, but they did. The more the legal team explained how Bette's voice was tied to her identity, the more the lawyer began to question his beliefs. Despite his confidence, the lawyer could feel the ground shifting beneath him. He wasn't sure anymore. Could he really win this case? As the courtroom drama unfolded, Bette Midler's legal team presented a strong and convincing argument. They didn't just focus on the fact that her voice was being used without permission, they showed how important her voice was to her career. They explained how it was tied to her identity and her reputation. Bette wasn't just a singer, her voice was a part of who she was. The lawyer for the company grew more nervous as the trial went on. At first he thought the case would be a breeze, but now things were starting to look different. Experts took the stand and explained how voices could be considered personal property, just like a person's image or name. One expert, a voice coach, explained in detail how Bette's voice was distinct, and how only a few people in the world could imitate it perfectly. This wasn't just any sound, it was Bette's trademark, a sound that connected her to millions of fans. The lawyer tried to push back, claiming that voices weren't protected under the law, but the more he argued, the more the judges seemed to doubt him. They asked tough questions, making it clear they weren't buying the idea that voices didn't deserve protection. Then in a key moment, Bette's legal team introduced a piece of evidence that changed everything. They showed a recording of the commercial, and compared it to a live performance by Bette. The differences were subtle, but the expert witnesses pointed out the ways the impersonation wasn't perfect. The company had crossed a line by using a sound-alike who was trying to mimic the exact essence of Bette's voice. The lawyer for the company started to realize that the case wasn't as simple as he had first thought. He had underestimated the value of Bette's voice. He had dismissed the idea that someone could own their sound. But now, in the middle of the courtroom, it was becoming clear that Bette's voice was as much a part of her identity as anything else, and that was something the law could protect. His confidence started to crack. He couldn't argue with the facts. The courtroom was no longer on his side. The courtroom grew tense as the judge prepared to announce the verdict. Everyone in the room knew that this case wasn't just about Bette Midler and her voice, it was about something bigger. It was about the idea that a person's identity could be protected, even in a way no one had expected before. Bette's legal team had made a powerful case, and the company's lawyer was starting to realize he was losing. The evidence was clear. Experts had explained how Bette's voice was an essential part of her brand. It wasn't just sound, it was her. The judge paused, looking at both sides, weighing the arguments. Then with a clear voice, the judge made the decision. The company was held responsible for using Bette Midler's voice without permission. The court ruled in her favor, stating that a voice could indeed be protected under the law. The lawyer for the company was stunned. All his confidence, all his mockery of the case had come crashing down. He had never imagined that something as simple as a voice could be considered property in a legal sense, but the court had decided otherwise. The company was ordered to pay damages, and Bette Midler's victory was celebrated by her fans. Not only had she won the case, but she had also set a legal precedent that would change how voices were viewed in the future. For the lawyer, it was a bitter moment of realization. He had been so sure of his position, so certain that Bette's case was weak. Now, he understood just how wrong he had been. The case wasn't just about a voice, it was about the protection of one's identity. Bette Midler had shown that no one could steal what made her who she was, and the law had recognized that. As the courtroom cleared, and the tension began to fade, the lawyer sat quietly in his seat. He couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. He had lost, and worse, he had made a huge mistake. For so long he had been confident. He had laughed at the idea that a voice could be legally protected. In his mind, it was just sound, a simple fleeting thing. How could anyone claim ownership of something so intangible? He had believed that Bette Midler's lawsuit was just another celebrity trying to make noise. He never thought her case would actually change anything. As the judge's words echoed in the courtroom, the lawyer sat frozen in his seat. The ruling wasn't just a legal decision, it was a revelation. It hit him like a wave, crashing over his confidence and leaving him stunned. He had been so sure of himself, so certain that this case was nothing more than a celebrity throwing her weight around. But now, as the weight of the judge's decision settled on his shoulders, he began to understand just how wrong he had been. This wasn't just about a voice. It was about something far deeper, far more personal. It was about identity, the very essence of who a person is. Bette Midler's voice wasn't just a collection of notes or a melody, it was a part of her soul. It was the sound that had carried her through decades of performances. The sound that had touched millions of hearts. When people heard her sing, they didn't just hear music, they felt something. They felt her. Her voice was her fingerprint, unique and irreplaceable. And now, the law had acknowledged that. It had recognized that her voice was more than just a tool, it was a piece of her identity, something sacred that no one had the right to take without her permission. The lawyer's mind raced as he replayed the trial in his head. He had been so dismissive, so arrogant. He had laughed at the idea that a voice could be protected, that it could hold such value. To him, it had seemed like a ridiculous claim, something only a celebrity with too much time on their hands would pursue. But now, sitting in the quiet aftermath of the verdict, he felt a deep sense of shame. He had underestimated Bette Midler, he had seen her as just another famous face, someone who lived in a world of glitz and glamour, far removed from the struggles of ordinary people. But she wasn't just a star. She was a fighter. She had stood up for herself, not for fame or money, but for the right to protect what was hers. Her voice wasn't just a career asset, it was a part of who she was, and she had fought to defend it with everything she had. The lawyer's cheeks burned with embarrassment as he thought about how he had mocked her case. He had scoffed at her legal team, convinced they were grasping at straws. He had told himself that this was a weak case, one that would crumble under the slightest pressure, but now, he saw the truth. The case wasn't weak, it was groundbreaking. It had forced him, and everyone else in that courtroom, to confront a question they had never considered before. What makes a person who they are, and how far should the law go to protect that? His mistake wasn't just about losing the case, it was about failing to see the bigger picture. He had been so focused on the technicalities, on the legal loopholes, that he had missed the heart of the matter. Bette Midler's voice wasn't just a sound, it was a symbol of her identity, her hard work, and her connection to her fans. It was something that couldn't be replaced or replicated without losing its meaning, and by dismissing that, he had dismissed her. As he sat there, the weight of his error pressed down on him. He had been so confident, so sure of his victory, that he hadn't stopped to consider what this case truly meant. Now, he understood. It wasn't just about Bette Midler, it was about everyone who had ever felt that their identity, their voice was being taken from them. It was about respect, about recognizing the value of something that couldn't be measured in dollars or contracts. In the end, Bette had won. She had stood her ground and fought for what was hers, and the law had stood with her. The lawyer, on the other hand, had learned a hard lesson. He had learned that you should never underestimate someone's right to protect who they are. And as he gathered his papers and left the courtroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that this case would stay with him for the rest of his life, a reminder of the day he underestimated the power of a voice and the woman behind it.